I'm really glad to be here with Drew because we've gotten to know each other again after a long time. I'm actually amazed that he's still talking to me because years ago, and he won't remember this, I got tickets to go to one of the shows that he was responsible for doing the graphics for. And when you get the tickets, there's a letter that says, please do not leave at intermission because you'll leave an empty seat and it will be embarrassing. And I was with my son and I said, do you want to stay? And he said, no. So I said, well, let's go. And he said, but you're not supposed to. And I said, no one will know. And as we were walking out, we ran into Drew. And I told Drew I had to wake up early, which wasn't a lie. And then my son just said to me, that was awkward. So I met Drew over 30 years ago, although it really does seem like yesterday. He was a designer after having been a student with Paula Scher at Coppell and Scher. He was a big guy, as he still is, so he was hard to miss. But after the dissolution of the studio in what was once a scruffy neighborhood now called Nomad, he briefly disappeared into the miasma of the New York design world, or at least my consciousness of it, only to reemerge before my eyes as the founder of a design firm called SpotCo. That was the beginning of the change in the way Broadway and off-Broadway productions were being branded. From former SVA student to small student designer to main man at a hot studio, he was doing a stunning transformation. There were steps in between in the entertainment business, like these, which I will get to as soon as I can escape. Escape never works as well as you think. There we go. And then full screen. And then the picture. These are some images that Drew will talk about momentarily. There were steps like these in between he carving out a niche in the Great White Way, Broadway, that was truly amazing. And from my perspective, it is a big, big chunk of design history. Fortunately, that history is now in a book called On Broadway, From Rent to Revolution. I urge you to get a copy through your local Amazon. But even more fortunate, we have Drew here to talk about how he navigated some of the incredible super egos that he has had to deal with to change the look and feel of Broadway. So before we begin with a visual feast, I want to bring him up so you can say hello to Drew. The man. And I've got a couple of little questions, like why did you call the company SpotCo?
So that's an easy one. So I worked for Paul. I went to SVA, worked for Paul as a senior. I was an intern at Coppell and Scher. I painted the walls with Terry, and on 2017, 6 and 7. Then I worked there for 3 years. Then I started to freelance and which became a design studio. So it was me and one person, me and 2 people, ultimately up to 5. And that design studio was called Spot Design because we couldn't have a dog. The landlord wouldn't let us have a dog, so we named, and the logo had like a dog on it. It was sort of the beginning of dogness. And it's sort of before now where like every beer has a dog on it. But this was 97, so it was a little more novel. And so then when we became an ad agency, which is a story in itself, which I can tell here, it became Spot and Company from Spot Design, and then it just became SpotCo. So it's not that exciting, but it's basically because we couldn't have a dog.
Well, it does answer a lot of questions.
I don't wait spot illustrations, and
Yeah.
I mean, we knew that stuff, and Coco the Clown, and we ended up actually taking space in the same floor as Max Fleischer's animation studio on this old building at 1600 Broadway. There were other pieces that led to that, but it really was because it was called Spot Design because we couldn't have a dog.
Well, you've left a big spot on the culture, I'd say. Do you want to say anything about these two images before we go?
This is, how people literally ask me a lot how I started in Broadway, because it is one of those worlds that is insular. And I had no idea that it was a world, much like the film world, which has maybe 5 or 6, maybe there's more, shops that do only film work. When I started, there were 5 shops that did Broadway work. They're all in New York. There are now 3. Depending how you want to define that, but I think there's 3. There may be 4 in about a second. And they speak to this little world, and they learn the secret handshakes, and you sort of don't get allowed in. But I got very lucky in that I had done this Aerosmith album cover for a woman named Robin Sloan, who is the creative director at Geffen, which became DreamWorks Records. And she did Nirvana, Nevermind. I mean, she's amazing. And she had me do this Aerosmith cover. They were leaving the label, and this is like a live album that no one ever remembers, and I did it. Moshe Baraka shot it. I did this Lisa Loeb. So I was doing record covers and a lot of Viacom work in New York. We were 5 people, and David Geffen had a want to invest in Broadway shows. He had invested in Cats, he had invested in Phantom, and he came into Rent. Rent had been up for a week, and down off Broadway, you remember Jonathan Larson died, opening night, and it was this huge quake in the city for theater, and David knew that he would be given, David only had the deal for the album, and he knew that he would be given whatever artwork was done for the poster would then be on the cover of the album. And he was smart enough to know back when we had record stores that he wanted to sell in the front of the record store in the pop racks and not in the back of the record store in the rock and roll racks. I mean, in the show tune racks. So he wanted a rock and roll cover, is the bottom line. So he said to his creative director, can you send somebody? I got sent in, and I got given Rent to work on, and I was only supposed to do the album cover. And to skip forward, and I'll take you through the design, but to skip forward, in 1 year, I did Rent and I did Chicago. And because they both exploded financially, and I want to be really clear about that, it wasn't because everyone thought that what I did was so genius. It was because they made a lot of money. And when they made a lot of money, then people said, well, I don't know, what about this guy? And they started to give me Broadway work, and that was really the beginning. So I got opted in by David sending me doing album covers to do this Broadway album covers. So
before you go into Rent, just one quick question.
Yeah.
What are Broadway posters used for? What are they supposed to do?
Wow, it's such a good question. And of course it's different now. When I first did it in '97, that's the first Broadway show. Rent is '96, actually. Really, they give a personality to the show, and you would put them in the New York Times.
But are they supposed to fill seats?
So a poster at this point, I'm not sure. A brand, my point of view on it is this, that they're an emotional promise. That you're in a Broadway show, there is no trailer, right? You can't tell what the show will be except for whatever we put out. The truth of the matter is probably what they're supposed to do is fill the first 4 weeks of seats. Because if you can get enough people sitting there talking about a show, then it rolls downhill. And if you can't, and I've worked on big shows that in the very beginning no one was going, and it actually takes a long time to catch up. Right. You have to get the engine rolling downhill. So the job is really that, to kind of get it rolling. But people have different points of view as to what does that. Like it can be that you announce that Hugh Jackman's in it, or Bette Midler's doing Hello Dolly, and then that engine kind of takes off like a shot, and your job is probably to keep the thing on guardrails,
so
and not go too far outside.
That brings us right to Rent, which was an amazing, it was like a volcano erupting.
So on Rent, this is what happened. I had gone to Broadway shows my life. My mother, who's here, yay, mom's here, had a music background from the city. I grew up in Westchester near Rhinebeck, and I would take the train into the city and see shows, and rock and roll shows and whatever. I was not some crazy theater person, but it was a part of my vocabulary, and I knew it. And then I would look in the paper, particularly while I was going to SVA, and see these posters, and I would just think, these are terrible. These are so bad. Why are these so ugly? And I really started to feel like they weren't talking to me at all. They were clearly meant for somebody else, someone way older. And then when this came up, I went and saw the show, and I met the producers, and I had actually seen a campaign that they were working on. And it was super rock and roll. It actually had the N was a padlock, and it was sort of, you know, kind of as punkish as they could imagine. And I said to the producers, look, I don't really think this is right. Like, this is not really rock and roll. This is a musical. And like, that's who's gonna go. And I know rock and roll people, and they can see things all around the city for 15 bucks. They don't need to spend 75 to go see some rock version of a rock show that they can see. This is a musical. I said, you should be selling this to what I call, well, I said to me, but I said to the lapsed Catholics of Broadway shows, of which I felt I was, which was like people who had a tradition of going, knew what a Broadway show was, understood where to get a ticket, but just kind of thought that the messaging was never really aimed at that.
So it wasn't Jesus Christ Superstar or any of that kind of ilk hair, which
Yeah.
were rock and roll shows, more or less.
Yeah, and I think, but we had kind of left that time period, and we were back to, I don't know, Phantom or whatever it was, and most of it was so cheesy. And I basically just said, you know, it's pop, but we can make it kind of rock, but don't go so heavy into this like really rough thing. And of course, these are kind of rough. So these are the first two of the, so this designer who worked for me, Naomi Mitsusaki, it was a great studio here called Supermarket. She started working with these stencils, post no bill stencils that you can buy at the hardware store now. And because, you know, the guys in rent are in the tenement, and, you know, they're on those buildings that are boarded up, and they're squatting, and they're not supposed to be there. Actually, the ad agency that was the ad agency for rent, because I was a design studio, said to me at the first meeting, you must convince the producers not to move this show to Broadway. It will never work. The people who buy Broadway tickets own the buildings these people are squatting in, and they are not amused. And so that was a really, and I was like, really? And I was 33, 32 maybe. So I mean, I'm not a kid. I'm not like, you know, scraping by $12. I mean, I'm working. I have a successful design, so it's all fine. And I go see shows, and I was like, well, I don't think that's true. I think that like people like me would go to shows, do go to shows, but nobody ever aims at them. Like,
But it was also, it also echoed West Side Story in a way.
Well, I didn't know that. I mean, you mean the show? I mean, it was La Boheme. But you mean
No, just the grit of West Side Story, the musical and the film.
I mean, it was gritty, but you know, I also thought like it should be sold. So I mean, well, but this is the other thing that happened. It goes back to your question of like, what is it for? Different shows, it is for something different. And what amazed me about doing this work, there's a couple different things that amazed me, but one was that in fact, you know if what you're doing is working or happening. And I get given, I used to have in this presentation these lines and lines of numbers, and I would get given these every day. These like how tickets were selling for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and nobody said, oh, you're a graphic designer, you shouldn't have to know this. Like, you're supposed to know how tickets are selling every day, and like out 8 weeks, out 10 weeks. So suddenly I was in the middle of this business that design spoke to. Although people really had no idea whether design should speak to it or not. They just thought it was a nice poster. But I really thought it could speak to it. So that was fascinating. The other thing that moved me to do this was that when I was working on records or movies or Nickelodeon logos or whatever, you would never meet the people who made the real thing.
Right.
You would be so far away. On the Aerosmith thing, I had a 30-second phone call with Steven Tyler from a parking lot somewhere, and he said, I like it, it's good, click. I mean, like, that's it. Like, you would never, you know, I mean, everyone thinks that would be fun. You know, yes, there are a few people with stories of their life standing next to a rock star, but most people, that's not actually what happens on entertainment projects. But on Broadway, you can stand in the I mean, it's amazing how insular it is, and people who make Broadway shows get in such a tight circle that they start to not know how the show is, and they're dying for someone who knows enough about where they are in the process, but is not a public place, to tell them how it seems. And so people ask you as an art director, which they forget that I'm an art director, they would ask me, how's the second act? How's the number? I mean, it was just amazing to be like in the middle of the world. And it still is. I mean, I still get notes, I still get questions, I still get asked what people thought of the new number that went in, you know, third from, I mean, it's just amazing that people would ask you as an art director what you thought of the content of a thing. So that was so exciting. But in this case, so this is the original Rent logo. I just put it up because I've been told by people that it's tombstones, suitcases, tenements. It's 4 pieces of those stencils from the hardware store and black masking tape. That's what it is. I love how, but you know, I think compared to where we were with the mask and the shininess, it was so raw. And this, I have this is the real one. I took a picture of it on my desk and I trained it and put it away. But the reason, and here it is on the street trying to be really, really rock and roll, but I want to point this one out. Well, I'm gonna go back. So this white ad, this is the first ad for Rent. And basically I said to the producer, this is so hot, you should do as little as possible. And he was like, what do you mean? I said, well, everyone now has this point of view wanting to see the show, and they're just waiting for you to put something out that's suddenly uncool. Because it's like the coolest thing in New York that you can't get a ticket to. So you need to do so little. And that was, you know, and that was the idea in the beginning. And the, you know, the Times is just filled with these ads. There's so much dreck and Photoshop and terrible. But we just made this white ad, and we, you know, didn't use the typewriter typefaces. We like got an old typewriter and punched it out and glued it down, and this is the ad. And somehow, and that just seems shocking.
And he let it go. He didn't gulp.
Well, he got it. He actually really understood it. This producer named Jeffrey Seller. It was just it's the same producer as Hamilton, which we will speak about at the end, and literally, oddly, the same advice. Like when I saw, and I got to see Hamilton really, 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 really early. I could see Hamilton before the second act was finished in a reading in a room this big. And I knew it was the best thing I had ever seen. And he knew it too. And I think Lynn knew it too. We all knew it. And I said to him, you've got to do so little. Like, don't blow it. We cannot do it like a funky downtown and a hip hop and like just back off.
So for those of you who haven't seen Hamilton, this is as close as you'll get.
Yeah, ever. I'll do the numbers. So we did the black and white, and then I really wanted to do the color. And I did this with Amy Gwip, who's a great photo illustrator, who's no longer a photo illustrator. And this is the first thing she ever did digitally, which is kind of interesting because usually she would glue it all down. But the big deal here was that we photographed the cast, which is funny because, you know, so this is Adina, and so now she's famous. Here's Jessie, Law and Order Jessie. This is Adina again, Tay Diggs. I mean, they were all completely unknowns, which is fun. But so I photographed them, and everybody said, everyone in Broadway said, why are you doing that? Like, they're not Liza. The only person who you ever take a picture of is Liza Minnelli. Which is it was really funny to me at the time. Now I think, yeah, take a picture of Liza.
Well, also, they didn't use photographs much at all.
So they didn't use photographs, and it wasn't the way it was done. It was just somehow, you know, we had the phantom mask and the helicopter graphic, and using a photograph, because I knew it, and I explained to everybody, well, they said, why are you doing this? They're not known. And I said, I'm not using the photograph because they're known. I'm using it to give an emotional tenor of the show. And so that became the thing that I understood, was that on anything, my job is really to make an emotional promise. And it has to be based on what's true. Because if you take a thing that's going to be tragic and you make it a little lighter, you're dead in a week. Like, people go and they hate you for it and they hate the show more. So that you can't do. But you try and look at any given show and come up with 4 or 5 things that are real about it, and then you think about which ones you think you can communicate, because sometimes half the real things that are great, there's no way you can show it, or you can't even give it away because it's a secret about the show. And then you try and figure out what emotion you're trying to convey, and then you come up with a visual way to do that. So in this case, I wanted all the raw energy, and I wanted to seem contemporary, because I wanted to be able to speak directly to people who are my age and say, this show is for you, don't you get it, this is for you. So that's how Rent happened. Now, I'm a designer, we have 3 other designers working for us at the time. Then I do the album cover in the color, then I get asked to do this, and then I start writing the copy, and I am the one-man ad agency for Rent, because I'm like the only guy who can understand Rent within the world of Broadway, which is, you know, this insular, older, sort of kitsch, you know, kind of hello dolly kind of a universe. And I'm like seen as like, you know, I'm like the most middle class guy, and suddenly I'm seen as the rocker of Broadway, which is just amazing to me. But like that was, I worked it. So this is the front of the theater, which also was this beat up theater, the Needlelander. At the time, nobody had been in it for a bunch of years, and there were like raccoons in the theater, and that all worked. And this is the subway. I remember we said we were going to put ads in the subway, and they were affordable then. And there's some scandal, by the way, as to why ads in the subway are now so expensive that no one ever that you like takes an ad there. But like Dr. Zizmore is there, and it doesn't make sense. And I really don't understand where someone's pocketing the money, because they could just make ads in the subway affordable for all the great things that happen in New York, but they're never there.
We can just blame Trump.
Yes, blame Trump. I like it. So anyways, we put these ads in the subway that said things like, you really can get tickets. You can get tickets, because at this point, rent blows up so much that in fact, I am getting people going to the show who have no idea how to get a ticket to a Broadway show. Like it becomes this thing that we have to tell people that you can get tickets where you get your rock and roll tickets. Eventually at Rent, one day, my good friend Darius in the back, we found a buying pattern in Rent. This is 10 years later, 5 years later, that were 3 tickets. It was the oddest thing, and we couldn't figure it out. It was 3 tickets, and they were never together. It'd be 2 and then 1, 2 rows back, 2 and then 1. So we went to the theater to see who was the 2 and the 1. It happened over and over again, and we finally figured out that it was mothers bringing their teenagers for their first Broadway experience. But the kids are just at that age where they don't want anyone to know that they have a mother. So they would buy, so the parents, God bless them, would buy 3 tickets, and they would sit 3 rows back so that the kids could sit 2 rows up and have a cool experience. And, you know, so that was like, that's who eventually went to Rent.
The Needlelander was also on a street that was south of most of the Broadway theaters. It was out of the way, so it didn't feel like you were going to legitimate theater.
Yeah, it was, I remember, it was Lena Horne, and then it like shut down, and it was like this forgotten theater. And I'm sure the theater owners, there are 3 big landlords that own all the Broadway theaters, and they play a real role in deciding what goes in, because they take a percentage of the take. And so it is in their interest to have a hit. It's a very draconian world, although lovely people, and they maintain the landmark theaters, and there's a whole thing. You know, you can't have another one, there's only so many, and the seats and the whole thing, and the women's restrooms, and we could talk about it all night long. But they have a real role, and that was a theater that nobody wanted, because it was south of 42nd Street, and 42nd Street, the further west you got, the skankier it got, and that street was considered a rough street, although now, you know, when commuters go home, they go, you know, to the Port Authority, they stream right through there. But at the time, nobody wanted to go there. But that worked out great. There was a marquee that was just the bare light bulbs. That was a mistake. It was supposed to be on white, and they put it up on clear. And I saw it, and I said, leave it, leave it, leave it. It's amazing. It's just, so we did this whole deconstructed thing with Brent, basically, where we sort of made it the on-musical. There was a line that I wrote that was in the subway that said, don't you hate the word musical? Which was like really provocative, and intentionally so, because I actually loved musicals and hated that people thought that a musical couldn't be cool, that it just sort of was a thing that they wouldn't go to, they wouldn't talk about. So Rent was sort of the anti-all that.
So that started the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Where does the ball go next?
The same year, the guy who produces this used to work for the guy who produces this. When he calls me up, and he's like, look in the dictionary under producer, and he's there. He's like Brioni suit, big cigar, Trump Tower. His name is Barry Weissler. He's a kind of citizen of New York, and he's like, kid, like literally like that. And I should say that Jeffrey and Kevin, who produced Rent, were the opposite. They're like me. So I see Chicago, and the thing they talk about with Chicago is actually something that's really important to me, which is this figuring out of the event, which I've talked to Stephen about some, and it's in the book some, which is basically, a producer said to me once, I really love this show, but I can't figure out the event. And I was like, what do you mean by that? This show called Catch Me If You Can, which didn't do well eventually, and she didn't know what she meant, but I became fixated on it. And what she meant was, or what I think she meant was, like, if I say to you, you should go see Chicago, and you say, why? Whatever I say is the event. And I know that sounds really simple, And the event doesn't have to be hard. It can be really easy.
The event is the reason.
The event is the reason, but it's got to be sort of on a word of mouth level. It can't be, it's existential, it's intriguing, it's a remaking of a 1930s German film. Like, no. Like, you're going to go because someone says, oh, it's so scary, it's cool, right? And you have to know, and there can be many for a given show. So you have to decide what it is and then how to express it. And that's going to, I mentioned that earlier about Rent, and that's going to come again and again. So Chicago, was a show in the 70s, was a flop, was redone in a thing called Encores, which happens where they do, at City Center, they do 4 nights in performance of a forgotten musical. In fact, it's going on right now. The review just hit my phone for one that's been on for 4 days right now called The New Yorkers. But they used to do it all in black because there were no costumes, and it's a whole union thing, and they usually hold the scripts in their hands because you're not allowed to pay these people so little and turn into a performance. So this is like a stage reading, it was called. So that's why Chicago looks like it looks. It's kind of an amazing thing, but that bandstand in Chicago was lifted right from the stage of Encores. Who cares? Doesn't matter. But Cindy Adams, Liz Smith wrote a column that said, who's going to pay $75, which is what a ticket cost then, for a glorified concert? And I read that, and I was like, ooh, this is bad. Because we were in the world of chandeliers flying down and helicopters landing, and Chicago has like nothing. Chicago's an amazing musical, but there was the set was so stripped down, it was sort of the opposite of getting your money's worth in terms of perception at the time. And so I became really intrigued by the idea of how to own the minimalism, that I said to the office, guys, this is what we got to do. The event is, I'm screwing my own thing, but this is the first time I figured it out. This isn't something I'd say to somebody else, but I knew the thing we had to solve was minimalism is cool, this is what we want it to be. And so then we kept thinking, and finally I said, when Calvin Klein does a black and white ad, no one says, oh, I guess he didn't have money for color. I don't know why, but in that world of fashion photography in black and white, minimalism is an asset, not a sort of step down. But in Broadway, it was perceived as a step down. So we said, okay, fashion photography, that's what we're going to do. And we went and got Max Vadukel, who was a Vogue photographer, and I pitched it to Barry using all these supermodels. And actually, they were all shot behind all the theaters. And you can barely tell that one of the top says theater fun, one of them says backstage. But they were terrified because they said, this is just going to look like a nylon ad, which eventually, actually, there was a Chicago nylon ad, unbelievably. And the reason why they were afraid is they said to me, when I finished this, the director called me up and said, you've turned my show into pornography. It was the day before the ad ran. This is a double truck in the New York Times, 2 pages in the New York Times, full bleed. And they were really scared. They sort of said, Broadway shows just don't look like this. And I was like, I don't know. Why not? I really was sort of like, why not? And so this was the first ad. And then there are so many things I could show. But these are like outtake pictures. We shot so many pictures over the years. The black and white is just such your friend. You can do kind of anything. We basically had 2 rules. One is, I just lost the second one. But the main rule was, well, they go together. Oh, I remember it. So no behind bars. I said no women behind bars ever because of the second one, which is that the women can be this sexy. Let me go back one, if it will. Particularly this shot with the spread eagle there. The women can only be this sexy if they're in charge. And I don't know why I knew that. I just knew that, and I said it. And from then on, that was the rule, and it's still the rule. And if the women go behind bars, then they're victimized, and then they're not in charge. And then it feels totally weird to make them so sexual if they're not going to be in control. So that is just the Chicago rules, that the women are never in behind bars, and they're always strong. And once we knew that, you just can't go wrong. And the women love that. If you tell it to the actors, they understand it immediately.
I love the fact that you came up with that. It makes you God.
Well, B.B. Newworth is still God, but for an hour I get to be God. They sort of listen to you. So this is Uda Lemper on the left, who has most amazing legs, and Michelle Potteroff on the right. And so then we did this. This is my assistant laying on the ground, Mark. And here's an account person from the office. That's how we did this. It's how we still do it. It's still very much, made here. And, you can... The other thing that happened was that we would ask these great people to work on these shows, and they had done everything except for this, right? Nobody had ever worked on a Broadway musical, so you could ask anybody, and they would be like, I think I'm interested, you know what I mean? So like, we could never pay what they were getting, but you know, we paid okay, and you know, they had a blast because it would show up all around the city, and they loved that. It was sort of better than 2 pages in the middle of a real, you know, really thick magazine that would then, you know, become a door.
And it's kind of a copyrighted language. I mean, you own this language.
Yeah, I know, that's a weird thing. It's like, I found that by doing this, it's, well, here's a better way to say it. Like, there are all these American dreams. You can hit a home run in the World Series. You can become a rock star. You can write the great American novel, right? And most of them are pretty retro. They just are. Like, you can, even if you're Elon Musk, it's like you can, you know, be an astronaut and go to Mars. It still feels like a kind of 1940s idea. And you can be on a big hit Broadway musical and go to opening night and drink champagne and wear a tuxedo and read the review in the New York Times on the top of the table. And that is still real. And that still happens. And I have been there many a time, and it's amazing. And when you're there, you're thinking, this is such an old American dream, and yet it's actually alive, and you can be a part of it. And I'm a designer, and I got to be a part of it. Now, I got to be a part of it because I became a marketer from being a designer, and I love that it made me do that. But that was part of it, is that, so you end up, the iconography of a show goes down in history in a way that, like, you do something else, like some logo for Comedy Central, and it's just gone, right? It's just like you do it and it's over. And I remember I had a designer work for me, and he walked to the office, and he said to me that during the walk to the office, he had 2 different pieces of our work get stuck in his shoe. Like, not once, but twice in one morning commute, he stepped on some piece of work that we made that was trash. This is before Broadway. So it was like, okay, this stuff is pretty expendable. But the Broadway stuff is sort of historical. It's an amazing thing. It sticks a bit. These are some more. You know, we did so many different things. She originally sat on the Guggenheim. That was a mistake. It looked so much like a toilet bowl, you cannot imagine. And we did this calendar that was truly 40s that I loved. And we just got to make everything. And I got to go to London. I became sort of the style god for whoever would do this in Buenos Aires or around the world. So, it was a joy. I worked on it. I mean, I worked on it until I stopped. I worked on it for like 21 years.
So is this, once Chicago is over, then you're truly committed to making this into an advertising business?
Perfectly timed, Stephen, as always. So I'm a design studio.
Thank you.
We just get paid in design fees for Rent and Chicago, just like everybody here does. And then the producer of Rent took me to dinner and said, you should be an ad agency. And I said, oh, I don't want to be an ad agency at all. Oh my God, I'm a designer. And he said, how much did we pay you for all of your design fees? And I added them all up, and it was like the album, the thing, the this. It was a whole bunch of different projects, and it was $48,000, which didn't seem bad. And this is 97, by the way, so like, just for inflation. I mean, that wasn't terrible. And he said, okay, we paid the ad agency $1.1 million. Now, I now know, if anybody who doesn't know, in the oldest world, ad agencies make 17.65% on the media that they buy. That's how an ad agency gets paid. There are lots of other versions now, and probably people in this audience going, no one does that anymore. But that's what people did. So the reality of that $1.1 million is that the ad agency made $165,000 and I made $48,000. And to be fair to them, which I didn't understand at the time, I had 4 employees and they had, way more than that to do what they do. So I didn't really fully understand exactly what was being said to me till later when I had, all the employees it takes to be, all the things that an ad agency needs to do. But we were 5 people, and then we closed. We decided we'd become a true ad agency. We closed down for 2 weeks and reopened, and we were 12 people. That was how many more people we needed to add to a design studio to be able to buy ads in the New York Times. And we had a credit history. We were a real business, because the New York Times is, in fact, incredibly uptight about a new ad agency, and they just don't even budge an inch because they've been screwed before. So we were 12 people, and ultimately now SpotCo is 122 people. So I mean, it really You know, it did a thing that I could never see coming.
But in addition to that, there were other agencies around that must have gotten very nervous about what you were doing. And I presume you heard from them.
There was one, Torino Kawaii is the oldest one, that's called Torino Kawaii, and Nancy Coyne runs it. She doesn't anymore, but she did, and matter of fact, she's very much around. They do like the Disney stuff now, and they go way back. They were really the blue chip. And everyone kept saying to me, literally people would say to me the same thing over and over again. They would say, Nancy's gonna kill you. And then I finally started to say to people, do you mean I am physically in danger? And I wasn't sure. And they would say, kinda. And it was a little bit interesting because, of course, I wasn't, but there was a little bit of a sense of Damon Runyon, you know, the New York Times and kickbacks and printers, and there was this little sense, certainly, there's one world, the guys who put up all the marquees and all that stuff,
Yeah.
I think, I should say now that I think that's long ago, but let me just say, when we started, that felt really, really Damon Runyon-esque. That felt like you had to know a guy who knew a guy who got the permit, who got the thing up, and a little bit on the side wouldn't hurt.
I actually knew some of those guys, so you're not wrong.
No, yeah, you were like grew up with them or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a sort of celebration of Chicago. These are all different shoots. We put them all together in one because we hadn't done that yet. It was sort of like, what haven't we done? We haven't done a car. We haven't done a plane. We haven't done a boat. You know, we would just keep going, and it was an amazing account to work on. It was a hard account to work on actually because it had to really keep selling. It's now the longest running American musical ever. So, like, I mean, we have been selling tickets for 22 years, and it's not like a movie where, like, you kind of have your moment, and then, I mean, every day, no one wants those seats to go dead. And I mean, every day of every year, it's like, how about next Thursday? What about Friday? What about Easter? What about Halloween? You really, really, you have to love the brand, and you have to, and the brand has to work, or the brand is gone, and so is the show, and so is your client. Okay, so this, I love this. Remember this? Anybody remember this? You guys are mainly young. Howard Johnson's 44th Street, and this billboard above it. Nobody wanted this billboard because you couldn't backlight it. You couldn't put it up with vinyl. So creative director worked for me, Vinny Sonato, came up with this. And it was those, they call them washers, but they really come from car washes with the, you know, the little sequins that, you know, they're the size of a quarter, and yeah, they literally nailed them all on. This whole thing is on plywood. We actually saved it, but it looked amazing. It was super retro, and it was actually way better than all the digital boards around it because it sort of was alive and moved all the time. So that was like my favorite Chicago thing. So we're moving a little bit into comedy here, and there's so much work, and I almost wish you guys could ask questions while we talk because so many different places we could go with this, but we're going to do some work and then occasionally talk about a point. But this is, one of the things that I decided with that event thing is that sometimes when someone says, I should go see Avenue Q, and you say, why? And they say, because it's really funny. And what I find amazing about most Broadway ads is that for comedies, the ads were never funny. I don't know why that is, but even like Neil Simon stuff, with some of those ads I kind of admire for their kind of old schoolness. But they're never funny. There's never a funny ad for a Broadway show. I don't know why. So Avenue Q was given to us. It was an impossible sell. It was when Crank Yankers was on TV, and sort of, it was called the Dirty Puppet Show by so many people, and people thought it didn't belong on Broadway. And I really think it was sort of the beginning of popular culture coming up to Broadway. The biggest compliment I've gotten on the book is that the time period it covers, which is from Rent to Hamilton, actually covers a time period when Broadway goes from being this sort of fabulous invalid retro thing referencing the 30s, 40s, which is a time period when in fact Broadway was mainstream and on the pop charts. And kind of beginning with Rent, and I'm not going to say ending with Hamilton, but I mean, Hamilton is the return of that idea that that a Broadway show could be a contemporary cultural piece on the actual pop charts, not in any nostalgic way. I mean, that's an amazing thing, and it happened a lot through all the stuff that we worked on, because we became, if you wanted old school, you went somewhere else. If you wanted to feel like something that was contemporary today, you went to us. So all the new stuff went to us, and mainly new stuff that people thought they couldn't figure out how to sell a ticket to. But that was really, really fun. So Avenue Q was this, you know, outrageous thing, and it was sexual, and it was puppets, but it also cost like $80 to go, which is kind of a problem. So we just ended up making these series of posters that made people laugh. And then these two ads I love. Avenue Q was up against Wicked for the Tony. Everyone said in every piece of the paper, every piece of journalism, that it was sort of a joke, that there was just no chance at all. And so we just decided that the point of the Tonys would be to just remind people what Avenue Q was about. It wasn't about winning. It was just about brand reinforcement. And so we just started to make fun of the whole thing. And we started to run to win a Tony. And this is issues we tackle the issues photos care about, which is, I can barely, fighting hangovers, gay Republicans, keeping your job, finishing your job, finding a job, and fear of commitment. So like, I mean, we were just screwing around and having a ball doing it. And this was really, all the actors got nominated. We made these buttons, and we made these and gave these out. I mean, they said, "Don't suck, vote Q," like all around New York. And then Avenue Q won the Tony. And that literally, people just lost it because it didn't seem possible. And from then on, we've won the last 9 Best Musical Tonys in a row, starting with this one. And I like to think it's because we actually figured out that you really can sort of run to win a Tony, which is a long story, but it's not that long. It basically means you can just remind people what's best about who you are. And that's really what all branding is. And it's never skewing something to what it isn't, because it doesn't work at all. It's understanding who you are and finding a visual mode to transmit that.
And was there ever any problem with Avenue Q in terms of censorship or city morals, policies? I mean, Broadway at one point was, burlesque was shut down by Mayor LaGuardia.
Well, that comes up in Vagina Monologues. That happened in Vagina Monologues. It did. On Avenue Q, I think it had enough sense of humor that nothing ever got pulled. I mean, we lost street sniping, and that was sad, but that wasn't about morals. I mean, we had ads that were kicked back from the Times, and there's still a kind of an amazing process. You know, the strip ads on the cover of the art section of the New York Times in the bottom had to be approved by the ethics department of the New York Times, so that there's nothing in the ad that will speak to the editorial that's above it. It's the only ad that we put in that has to do that.
I know, I used to try to get into that office and they'd throw me out.
So, there were people saying you can't run this headline, but not that much. It was mainly satirical and sort of sweet. That happened on Vagina Monologues, which will come up soon enough. Okay, so this is more of my comedy section. I love this ad. So these are called the ABCs. You guys have seen these in the New York Times. And they're sort of a holdover from a long time ago. People pay money. A lot of people think those are free. They're not free. You have to pay for the listings of each of those ads, and some shows decide to do it and some don't. And now some just do it on like Sunday and Saturday and not the rest, which is why it changes size all the time. But anyways, we wrote this Shrek. It's this long story that we take the whole night. But basically, Sam Mendes, this amazing director, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, and all those people show up at our office, and they're like, Shrek, you have to reinvent it, it has to be modern, it has to be adult. We actually already have research that said that the DVD sets had aged Shrek down so far that it was never coming back up, and I hold that to this day. It became a kid's brand. But anyways, we did everything we could to be clever and fun. And so this brand, and every single ad was written, I love Just Us Fairies down here. This is just a zoom in. So it's all over. Home Sweet Gingerbread Home. There's
Steed Muffin is pretty good.
Yeah, Steed Muffin. Huff Puff. 3 pigs, 3 houses, 1 tragic day. You know, the Goldilocks Project, which really I think referenced the Vagina Monologues. It goes, I Was the Tooth Fairy, a startling new memoir. You never look under your pillow the same way again. No, I'm Alone. That one's terrible. So Bashful Sings, from the producers of Doc Dances. That one's really good. That might be my favorite, Bashful Sings. So we wrote all these, and they loved it, and we ran, and it was really, really funny. I don't think it actually changed who went to see Shrek, because it was still parents taking their 6-year-old. But we were trying. This is Roz. So here's an event thing. You know, The Teleologist's Wife. These are sketches, and I just decided that Roz Test was the character in The Teleologist's Wife. It's this neurotic Upper West Side woman I told up Roz, this is one of those examples where you find someone's name and their number somehow, and Roz has done everything, but she's never done a Broadway show. And she goes, I'll do it. And like, she just did it. And these are 2 sketches, and then the final, we put the woman in the bag, because basically it had to work better. And we got her to draw all the type, which is kind of amazing that they let that happen, that the producers said, okay, great. Because, now I can imagine producers being like, that looks amateurish, I don't understand. It's a crayon. But I don't know, somehow this got pushed through. And Roz was amazing. And this is just another example of, I think, the tone of the art, matching the tone of the show. And so these posters start to become the previews, I think is really what they're doing. They're telling everybody, this is what this show will be like, and you decide if you're interested in that or not. And that's great, because I think nowadays everyone self-selects on everything. And you can't convince people to do things. You have to put out there the correct tone, and then they decide if that tone is for them. Nobody wants to be shoved. Everybody just wants to have a sense of what's this thing. If they can't figure out what the thing is, then you just move on, right? I mean, if you get something and you're like, I can't tell what this is supposed to be, you just go, there's 19,000 other things that are interesting. So like, you just skip it if you can't tell how to feel about it. So you just gotta figure out what's the tone you're trying to express, and then decide what technique could express it. And I know that sounds really simple, but it is really simple sometimes. So this is Lacage. This is sort of my illustration section. These never ran. So we were trying to figure out Lacage, and we ended up with a perfectly lovely, I think this is the second time I think we did Lacage. We ended up with photographs. The first time it was Robert DiMichele, the late, great Robert DiMichele. But the top row is Terry Allen, and the bottom row is Seymour Quast. And I always think they're amazing. And the client was like, I don't know what these are. They really didn't understand them, particularly Seymour's. They were like, can this person draw? They didn't understand the whole primitive, they didn't get it all. It was really
They didn't get the hairy legs?
They got the idea, but they didn't get the style. They're like, a Broadway show's expensive. This looks, kind of home done.
Was that also because there was a movie, and in the movie...
Yeah, and maybe even, and you and I were talking about this earlier, I did the photographs on Rent in Chicago, because no one ever did photography or ever used it well, and I was like, this is terrible. And then now it's gone completely the other way. Now everything is a photograph and not a great one. And oftentimes it's just like a picture of something and not that interesting. And I would kill to get back to here because it sort of has all become a movie poster. And in fact, some of the ads in Broadway now are in fact done by one of the movie poster houses, and they do a very good job of it. A shop called BLT does all Scott Rudin stuff. So. Doll's House or Hello Dolly, that stuff is now all done in LA. So anyways, I just loved what it looked like. So SpotCo has writers, TV, radio, transit, digital, social. We do all that. We're just doing print tonight, but that was also a joy of it for me, was that I got to be able to I was just a print designer, and this pulled me up and out to become a creative director.
Well, the stuff you did that you're not showing tonight, some of those spots on TV were really wonderful.
They were, and we started, much like anybody, we would use music video people who had never done a Broadway commercial, and that just seemed like a blast to them. So we got a lot of really great people to do it. So this was wonderful show with a terrible name called The Drowsy Chaperone, and nobody knew what to do with that name, and there's even a joke in the show about how bad the name is. So we decided to do an all-copy approach. And this first one I love because it's, if Noel Coward and Rex Harrison had had sex and don't think Noel didn't try, this would be their bastard child. So I think this gives you the tone of the show. And then we ran this ad, and Noel Coward's estate called up immediately and demanded that we stop running it. And we just kept running it because, we were like, what were they going to do? I mean, try and prove that this didn't historically happen? I mean, of course it didn't.
And Rex Harrison apparently didn't mind.
Right, they didn't call, right. They were both going at that point. But anyway, so this was a blast. So comedy. So this is more about type. But so John Leguizamo on the right. This is what I talk about with getting the tone right. John is, in fact, besides being a great guy, he's a method actor. Look, it's like Broadway. Will you silence your phones? John is a total method person, and he wrote this piece, and every word of it, he never screwed up night after night. I mean, it looked like he was making it up, and it always looks that way when you look at John. So I haven't seen the new one at the Public Theater, but he's an amazing performer, and he has this electric quality of inventing. But, so we decided that's what we wanted the poster to feel like. That I just said I wanted, when you said, should I go see Freak? And I say, yeah, and you say, why? I wanted someone to say, because it's like he's making up every night. It's incredibly electric and alive and funny. So we went to Ward Sutton, who's this wonderful underground comic artist, and he drew, John came to the office and did all these poses, and we handed him a Polaroid and he drew it. Gypsy, we did 1,000 posters to try and find a new way to do Gypsy. This is a designer named Rex Bonamelli, ended up with this great letters made out of the objects that are referenced in the show, and Sam Mendes loved it, and it was sort of deconstructing Gypsy. This, I love, this goes back, or this isn't particularly chronological. Sideman, Edie Falco's first play, amazingly. But this is what I love about this. Kevin Bernard, who's a designer working for me, went out and got a black album that the edge of where the 33 had been, had all the ink had rubbed off, you know, from sliding in and out of someone's collection. And then he scanned that edge, and that edge is right here. And you can just barely see it, but he just cared that much. And this, there's a piece in the play where the difference between a semicolon and a comma is the difference between life everlasting and not in a John Donne sonnet. And this is a designer named Stella Bugby, who's now the editor of The Cut in New York Magazine. I've had a lot of amazing creative people work for me, and that's part of what this is about. So she did that logo, and it's sort of the whole play. This is Gail Anderson. I just wanted to reference Gail. Gail was a creative director at SpotCo, and this for many years, and this gives you a real sense. The last one is the final, which shows a little bit how things, kind of weaken a bit to get them out the door, but it still ran, and I loved it, and really dealing what we had, which is a pastiche of an old review, and so why not go there?
And they're pitch perfect.
Yeah, they're just right. The weights, the everything. I think we even went to hat show print for some of the mores. I put this one in here to talk about, I think a designer named Bashan Arquad did this. I think it was his. Anyways, we worked on this Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and so this is the amazing thing about what I'm doing. I have to bring this design to Edward Albee. I mean, isn't that amazing? I've worked on 8 Pulitzer Prize winners. So I show it to Edward, and Edward is like this, he was this incredibly grumbling, difficult, funny guy.
I just want to get in. I went to the same military school he did.
But, and so you've got similar qualities.
I do.
That's sort of dark.
Dark, grumbling,
Yeah.
and drunk.
Well, yeah, better. He was not that drunk around me. Anyway, I showed him this poster, but Stephen is always drunk. But I showed him this poster, and he said, my play, young man, is not about drinking. And then I started to argue, and he starts to smile, and then you go, okay, you're arguing about what Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is about with Edward Albee, you will lose. Just walk out the door. And so I did, and it went away, and we did something else that wasn't nearly as good, but that was like, he was such a chess player that way that you knew that you just were not going to get it across. And because as all you guys know, half the stuff is doing it, and the other half is getting it to run. So this is a little break in the type stuff just to say more about what it's like to be in the middle of this world. So on the left, this is an opening night. This is 3 in the morning. It's Jeremy Irons and Tom Stoppard sitting on crushed Heineken cases having a smoke and a beer, and I'm there drinking with them. They don't know who the hell I am, but I'm still there. And then on the right, this is at the Tonys, which I get to go to every year, and this woman next to me won a Tony, and I did not know her. And she won, came back to her seat and said, will you hold this for me? And went to do all her press, and I didn't know her. And so her Tony was in my lap for like an hour, and I just took all these pictures of Bill, took pictures with it, and they're not engraved yet, then they hand them in like the Oscars. And so then she came back to the seat and she took it, but that's from my phone. That's what a Tony Award looks like, particularly after you're drunk. All right, so we could talk all night about this, we're not going to, but 9/11, so the theaters shut down, Times Square shut down. There was a real sense that they might not go back up. I know that seems odd now, but at the time, there was such a sense that Times Square could be a target, and...
Well, there was even a story in the Times that it was going to be a target.
Yeah. Well, our office was on Times Square. We had to evacuate it for like a week. and no one was allowed in Times Square. And then suddenly everybody figured out that we were going to have to tell everybody, whoever we is, New York was going to have to, basically the country figured out that they were going to have to tell everyone that New York was open for business and that it was patriotic to support New York. And so I had this idea about getting all of Broadway into the middle of Times Square and doing a TV commercial saying New York, New York. And I ran out the flagpole, and it went up bigger and bigger flagpoles till finally it got approved, and we were the first people allowed back at Times Square, and it was everyone on Broadway. There are some other people on the front here who are just on the front and part of it, like Glenn Close and things like that, but behind is all the Broadway cast in full costume, and they all met at the I don't know, Palace Theater. They all met at one of the theaters, and I got to speak to them, and we explained what we were going to do. This is like 5 days after the towers come down. And we invited the Rockettes, that's who's in the gold, and we were all waiting out in Schubert Alley. That's where it is, it's the Jacobs. And there's this sound, because Times Square is empty, there's no one allowed in it. And there's a sound of this jangling, we cannot figure out what's happening. And it gets louder and louder, and around the corner comes all the Rockettes tap dancing in a line across Times Square, and everybody started crying. And it was this amazing day. And this is a New York Times photograph. They parked 2 double-decker buses. And then it was sort of like the show must go on, and this became the signature of that. This is, that, without a doubt, the best day.
Before you turn it, they had to rehearse a number, right?
Oh, so I told Stephen this story. I have the outtake. So they, there's a choreographer, a director named Jerry Mitchell. He agreed, everyone agreed to work for free. And he hung, you know, the stairs weren't there yet. And he hung off one of the statues and with a bullhorn, and as people added to the square, he would teach them to dance, and it was like dun 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 bang, right, for the commercial, which he had like made up on the spot. And then Elaine Stritch, who's over here. If anyone knows, anyone here know who Elaine Stritch was? I mean, she passed away last year. So Elaine Stritch was this sort of amazing broad, and she could be amazing, she could be terrible, and kind of it was all one thing. But she showed up like hours late to this, and just her car just pulled up over here. I'm sure she just screamed at the cop, "I'm Elaine!" And she just walked in front of all of Broadway, literally factually all of Broadway, and stood next to Nathan so that she knew she would be on camera, because that's all she could care about. And then she didn't learn to dance. So Nathan goes, so she goes down like a beat ahead, and she goes boom, boom, and he's got it right. And he's up here, and so he goes down, right? She goes up, she goes boom, and she cracks him, like she basically punches him across the jaw, and he falls to the ground. We all thought he was hurt. I mean, that's how bad it was. So I had that outtake, and that was just part of the day. He laughed. He probably wanted to kill her, but he laughed, and all these people were great. If I was her, I would not be so happy. But I didn't take this photograph. But then, you know, Alan Hall and Tommy Toon and the Beast, and I mean, it was just an amazing, amazing day, a beautiful day. The best day of my career, easily. This is the slide I call Why Things Suck. Because a lot of things suck. And you know, to say that everything we made was great is not correct. But we tried. And so we got given the show Lucky Guy, and George Wolfe came to our office, and Nora Ephron had just died. And he had been working with her all these years. We had not. We didn't get to work with her, didn't know her. But he came in and made this incredibly emotional plea saying she loves his play about this time in New York when everything was gritty and rough, and what Mike McAlery, I think it was about this New York Post journalist. And the copy, which I loved, which I can't read on there, but I think I can read on here, it was like, it's like the city is crumbling, crime is rising, it was a wonderful time to be in New York. And that was what it was about. That's what the play was about. And so we did these and many more. There's a Paul Jeffrey is a great designer who did some of these working for me, and I loved all of these. I would have taken any of them. But George Wolfe said, the one thing we really do not need is Tom Hanks' face. Everyone knows what Tom Hanks looks like. And then they didn't sell enough tickets in the beginning, and everyone panicked, and this is the poster that ran. And it's just so crazy, because it's like, speaking of the event, so what are you telling people with this poster?
You've got Hanks.
Tom Hanks is in it. It was like the one thing people actually knew. So it's called Lucky Guy, and people are like, what is that? Is it any good? What's it about? Well, I like it. Should I go? Should I buy a ticket? Tom Hanks is in it. They actually already knew that one thing. So it's a pointless poster. pointless poster. Anyways, and Tom was mad because the first one that ran, and it's impossible to make him mad. He's exactly who you think you want him to be. He's the loveliest guy. And he didn't have a mustache because we didn't have a photograph with a mustache, and the character wore a mustache. And he was like, "What's this bullshit?" And I was mortified. This is a designer named Rex Bonamelli. This is a Neil LaBute play that I love, where we just put the type into a projector on a slide and put it on actually his body. It's sort of a Stefan Sagmeister thing. And these are other comps that I like just as much, of the shape of things. It's just clean and beautiful. One of the things that's great about the book is I just got to pull out a lot of designs that no one had ever seen. So this is Sweet Smell of Success on the left. This is Rex again. Steve and I were talking about the fact that the billing, there are very dense billing requirements that you get given for all of these posters, and that we could talk about it for a long time, and it's kind of boring, but basically it legally tells you where everyone has to be, and then you have to design around that. So John, luckily on the left, so John would be 100% of title on his own line above title. So that would be the rule that would dictate this.
Contractually.
And you could not, you can design it however you want, but that has to happen. But that's perfectly fine. You would often get 9 people above title, and you would get conflicting billing contracts where the thing could not actually happen in the laws of physics. Where things could be the same. But you had to sort of learn the tricks, and there are tricks. One of the tricks is to measure, is the height of the type that you're basing it on this letter, or the average of the two. So then you can start making other letters smaller and average all of them and tell the lawyers that's what you did. And that happened. But this is called favored nations billing, which is everyone gets treated the same. And I've never seen anyone do it like that, and I loved it because instead of it looking horrible, it looks kind of interesting. It's texture down the side.
Also, from now on, everybody in this audience can tell their friends they know about favored nation billing.
Favored nation billing, and when you do your own show, tell people you will not accept favored nation billing, that only you want 100% of title, above the title, no one else on your line. That's when you got the power. And if you get a percentage of merch, you're really rolling. Bernadette Peters gets a percentage of all merchandise. This is Victoria on the right, James. This is a place where, sometimes we just get given these huge quotes, and we know no one will read them. We know you don't read them. We know it. But they still make you do it. And I know that, so the messaging of it is, we got these great reviews, you don't really have to read this. Well, that's when I finally decided, so you might as well just use it. And so we knew we had this dense thing. So we just said to James, you have to write all of this, just go crazy. And he Xeroxed a knife, and it actually really looked different in the Times. This is the vagina monologues. This is an outtake. I love this. I don't quite know who did this. It might be Kevin. It could be somebody else. This is the word vagina over and over and over again up there. The same font, the same beautiful script font over. And then the leg, by Eve Ensler. And on the right, because it's, this year's politics, that was called the Pussy Purse. And that was made, and we would give it out to everybody because it helped change, and it just seemed remarkably vagina-like, and we thought it was funny. But when we started working on this, literally, you could not say vagina. And that whole idea really goes back to Eve. I mean, this is an amazing thing that this woman amongst us right now basically started the whole idea that women should embrace the word and be a part of it, and sexuality and all that. And we would make ads. A lot of our ads had these crazy taglines. Joe Montello came up with the one that said, "Spread the word," and that was on it. But we would make up these incredibly provocative ads and try and sneak them into the Times, because sometimes they would just miss it, and you would put in, and then it would run, and they'd get all these complaints, and they would get really mad, and that stuff happened. Oh, you asked me about Avenue Q. I just remembered we had a radio spot that said that character was called Lucy the Slut in Avenue Q. And on the radio spot, she said something, and it said, "Lucy the Slut says Avenue Q is for you." And it was on LTW. And remember how LTW would then would go over to 100% Christmas music at the holidays? There's a day like Thanksgiving, and it just goes bam. So that ad was still running, and there was a kid in a car with his mom, and he said, he heard the ad in the middle of the Christmas music, and he said, "Mommy, what's a slut?" And that was it. And that ad came in, and we had to pull it, and everybody was mad, and they thought they were going to get fined by the FCC. It was like a big deal. It was like, those fines are huge. This is fun. This is actually the ad that ran after the show opened. So we got this image to be so strong that we actually didn't say the name of the show. But the more interesting story here is that I shot this picture of Nicole Kidman and Ian, whatever, he's the Game of Thrones guy. Anyways, supposedly this is who she's having the affair with when she breaks up with Tom Cruise, which I cannot support or deny. But they did seem to get along very well.
Google it.
So when we were there shooting on the stage, it was like 3 of us, and we shot the picture, and I brought it back the next day, which is on the left, and Nicole saw it, and she was incredibly cool and easygoing. She looked at it, and she said, "This would be better if I was naked." She said that to me, and I said, "It would." And she said, "Can you fix it?" And I said, "Yeah." And so this is the photograph, and from here on down, it's just painted. It's just completely made up. And I love her for getting it. And I didn't have to say it. Like, she just said, "Do it." And then we did it, and she loved it, and then that was the ad. So much fun. This is the case where the event was, there's an event and a non-event, and what we basically figured out was, if you don't figure out who you want to be, whatever you work on will default to something. And the something is almost always the worst case of what you want it to be. Like, I call the non-event. Like, and even, I'll give you a nice one, which is Hamilton. And the worst case scenario, if we did nothing about it, was actually hip hop history. And in the beginning, people used to say that all the time. And I was like, I don't want the show to be thought of that way, because you're either into history or you're not, or you're into hip hop or you're not. And basically, after those 2 segments of people peeled away, there's kind of the rest of America, and I wanted them to go see this. So in this case, though, the event is Nicole Kidman's naked. That was the event. I mean, we knew that. That's why people wanted to go see it. So we just gave it to them. Like, so it doesn't have to be a complicated thing. You just have to know what it's supposed to be. So here's one. This is the opposite. So this is Grieving, the Year of Magical Thinking. We're working with Joan Didion. We've all read the book about the loss of her child. It is literally, what are we going to do? And we just decide that we're just going to do the most elegant, quiet, beautiful thing we can do. Brigitte Lacombe shoots this photograph. Only Vanessa can do this, where she could just sort of look through the camera and then you just go, what just happened? And, I love this poster because it actually is the opposite of so many other ones.
I can ask this about every poster you show, but in this case, it's so calm, it's so laid back, it's so emotionally striking. What went on when you presented this? Did they say anything about the black and white, anything about the elegance of the typography?
So this was done for Scott Rudin, who is the one of 3 producers who actually really is a fan of design and is aware of design. So, and he loved Brigitte. So we knew she was going to shoot it, and there were comps. It really was a series of different type designs, one more quiet than the next. And it was a very calm, I think Gail worked on this, and this was one of those ones that just went like, that's right, do it, that's the picture, done. It didn't actually twist and turn. Everybody knew what it was. There were a lot of different tiny variations on, 3 dots, not 3 dots, when you get down to sort of that level on the head of a pin. But nobody ever even threatened to wreck it. It would be a better story if they did. But and I don't really even remember, because Vanessa would have had to approve this photo, and that's always such a trick. Because, people are, how are you about photographs of yourself? You're never really, and it's the same thing with celebrities. They really don't know what's a good picture of them or why. And so, but no, everybody just said fine. I don't remember Joan even weighing in. But, and I can remember that on almost all these posters, but this one just happened this way. Probably the biggest thing I remember on this is that we couldn't get it to reproduce in the New York Times like this, which is, it's newsprint. But, so this, I love this. So we started to work on West Side Story, the revival. It was the first revival. And we decided we're going to redesign the logo from West Side Story, which actually comes from the movie. And we don't know who did it.
It was not Saul Bass.
So, and do you know, these are like these things that are missing that Steven has to go and find out, like who did West Side Story logo. But everything we do looks like crap because it all looks like some college production in like Oregon. Like it just doesn't look like really West Side Story. So we ended up So then we knew we had to use the real logo, and we went back to using it. And what I loved about this was, this is Kevin Bernard, we had this idea of how far could you peel it back and it'd still be West Side Story. And so we pitched the idea that that you literally needed one letter of this logo to understand that it was West Side Story if the copy was right. And the Tonight one ran. This really wasn't the campaign, but we did get it to happen once. It's one of my favorite things. This is Bo Lumberg doing the Mile High thing. You know, this was the one where the producer said to me, I don't know what the event is. And the reality is, neither do I, and the show didn't work. In the end, the show shut down because, frankly, the event was the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, and we didn't have him. And Steven Spielberg directed it, we didn't have him either. So it was a lot of airline stuff, which is, you know, great, but you're on a Broadway stage. And, you know, honestly, that's part of the job, is understanding whether or not what you're going to do can bring something new to what people know. So I loved all these down here, but this went round and round, but I was happy with it. I put this one in because we do get all these quotes half the time. This is James Corden before anybody knew him, and he was amazing in the show. Maybe, I don't think I've ever laughed so hard. Also, in London, they do 5 stars, not 4. Everyone in London thinks we all know this. We don't. Look at London plays when you go see them, and you will see 5 stars out in front, because in London, to get 5 stars is like an incredible rave. And here, we just don't even know what it means. It's just like just a bunch of stars. But I can't get them to know that, so we sometimes just go with it. But Breakfast at Tiffany's was a terrible play, but I thought it was a beautiful logo, this sort of brush that was built in Photoshop. And what's her name from Game of Thrones? I should know her name, but I don't remember. Yes, what's her name? The woman she's the one who rides the dragon. That's her. All right, I did love this. Bradley Cooper was a producer, and he did call me up, and I did have a Post-it note on my screen when I came to sit down for a meeting that said, Bradley Cooper is on the phone. And we were like, give me the phone. He was really smart, actually, and he said, I want the ad to look like what this would have actually been historically when John Merrick, who was the Elephant Man, was put on as an attraction. And so he wanted it to be historically correct. We looked up all the type. These are 3 versions. He did not want his face in it. The producers did. The one on the left, you can't really see it until I tell you it's there, but that's his face behind the type, which I love. And any of these would have been great. The one on the right ran. And then down here, we get to design the fronts of the theaters. And oftentimes, there's not that much money, and people are like, just cut it out. But sometimes someone really wants to go for it. And this was actually one there. Bradley wanted gas lanterns with live gas flames, and I was the one to tell him, okay, that can't happen on an open flame law in New York on a historical theater. And he was like, no, I'm Bradley Cooper, anything can happen. Which is sadly not true in a landmark building in the district. So there were no burning gas things, but it was fun. This is now unpublished work. We're near the end here. I want to leave you guys time for questions. We did this to pitch Matilda when it was coming here, and we did this whole constructivist sort of agitprop thing with the girl, and I loved this, and they were like, what is that? And so they didn't like it, but I loved it. I thought it was cool and from the period and Roald Dahl-ish. So these are 2 of my favorites. So this is Paul Jeffries. This is for a show coming, King Kong, with this enormous. When you hear about it announced, I don't know if the show will be good or not, but the ape is like 6 stories tall. I saw it, and the face is all animatronic, but the rest of it is all done like Japanese puppetry, where everyone's in black, and when they want his hands to go up, these guys rappel down, and their body weight lifts the arms.
What theater is it going to be in?
It's going to be in the Broadway. And in fact, which I didn't say that. That's not public information, and do not put that out on social media. I would be in big trouble. But anyways, it's amazing, and it's terrifying, actually, literally. It's one of the scariest things I ever saw. But whether they can build a show around it, I don't know. Anyways, this is photographs of Deco buildings in New York. The whole thing is real, and Paul turned it and built it into this thing. And actually, they loved it, and they said the worst thing to me, they said, it's so beautiful, it can't be the ad. And I'm like, what do you mean? I don't get that. What does that mean? And the one on the right is what we did for Wicked, and you all know what the Wicked artwork is. We didn't win the pitch. Don't judge a witch by its color, a great and powerful musical. I like this a lot better than what they did, but anyways, they didn't give me the job. And so we're in the home stretch here, which is Hamilton. But Hamilton starts with In the Heights. If anyone here ever saw In the Heights is an amazing show, and Lynn wrote it, and he is the person you want him to be. He is this guy, and we shot him using type from Bodega. This is off Broadway. The amazing thing is, he lived in Washington Heights. He lives in Washington Heights now, and this poster was in all the subways, and this was his cap, and he would ride home with the doors would open. He would see his poster staring back at him while he wore this cap, and he would pull it down over his eyes, and no one ever noticed that it was him on the poster while he rode the subway, because he was an unknown then. That wouldn't happen now. Okay, so here's some Hamilton designs. So this is where the hip hop history thing comes in, and we go downtown, and I actually wanted the Public Theater to do their own art, which they did, because I wanted that to be in their brand and not in the Broadway brand, so we kind of everything in its own time. And then we started to make it, and it got, this upper left here, it got all funky and downtown.
Did you know it was going to go uptown?
Yeah, we did. We really did. They would say, oh, we weren't sure. That's total crap. We totally knew. And, but I mean, look, if it had gotten terrible reviews, it wouldn't have. So in that sense, no one had put money down on the lease. But we did know it was going to go there. And so I said, I don't want it to be this downtown funky design. I know how to do that. We all would love doing that typographically. But I think it needs to be something that almost anybody could grab onto. So like I suddenly went back for this kind of the cat's eyes, you know, that's what I was looking for. So all these things went in, and we looked at them all. And this is a great client of mine, the same client as Rent, who really knows what good work looks like. And this is, I get credit for this. I did not design this. I did push for this tone. And a woman named Nikki Lindemann, who's married to Mirko, if you know Mirko.
Mirko Illich.
But she's a great designer who works at SpotCo now. She designed this. The moment I saw it, I was like, done. It was a different figure, and then we went and shot all the figures, and that is Lynn. You know, we added the buttons. He does that in the show, and he just did it on his own, and then we knew. And an American Musical we wrote and added. And we really had come up with the fact that gold was the through line between the revolution and hip-hop, that was like, okay, gold, right, gold is appropriate, and it didn't seem like it was, nobody wanted to make a 1970s thing. There was a lot of talk about Carol Walker. There was a lot of talk about silhouettes. I mean, we love that this referenced different kinds of iconography that were both old and new, that there are silhouettes from the Revolutionary War period that, you know, like when you go to Sacré-Cœur now in Paris and they cut out your face in black paper, that happened then, and, you know, you had that done for your family. And Carol Walker, and I actually, when this first came out, I was told with some anger by people that it was Michael Jackson or Freddie Mercury.
Oh.
And I was like, that's fantastic. Honestly, if you think that this Revolutionary War thing reminds you of Freddie Mercury, then I have done my job. And so this has been a total joy to work on. This is a much better sense of what we do. So this is like just a gazillion things that we make, and the albums and the book and the mixtape, which is the second piece, the ads in the paper, the billboards coming in on the LAE that are hanging there, the subway stuff. I mean, so this is what it really looks like to work on a show and all the different brands.
Is there somebody or bodies still assigned to it for the?
Oh yeah. Well, I still get a say. Kind of as like the last word on a few things. Like I got them not to perform in the Today Show, which is interesting, right in the beginning, and I said, I don't want anyone to see it. I don't want anyone to decide whether it's for them or for not until, and that's why on the Grammys, they did it live from the theater. The Grammys said, you come here, and I said, no, you come here, because it's all got to be in this, we've got to protect it. And I had learned that, and the producer listened to me, because he's a very good friend of mine. And so that's more my role now. I get to say things like that. But yeah, it's an ongoing thing, and everyone knows the brand and what the rules are, and it's a joy to do something new on it. But honestly, like we did this well, and now there's not that much to do with it. Like this is one that really stays the same. I love the way Chicago changes. This doesn't get to change that much.
You could put a line on it that says this show is underrated Trump.
Has he said anything about it yet?
He said it a few
right,
months
after
ago,
they
after
did it.
Pence.
That was, honestly, that's a whole thing we could do with. I mean, those are friends of mine. The producer I'm talking about is who wrote the thing that they said, along with Lynn. I mean, they got death threats that day. Like, that was an amazing moment in so many different ways. But one of the ways was that it was incredible that a Broadway show would be able to speak in that way to the country. Because, like, when I started working on Broadway shows, they were considered sort of trifles at that point. They were not a part of the dialogue of the country. And I think it's amazing that they are now. And so I'll just show you this. So this is, you've made it when there's a porn movie that uses your graphic. So someone sent that to me. And then this is just stuff I'm doing now. So I sold SpotCo, it's still there, I consult with them, they're great people. Some of those clients occasionally call me up to do a brand for them, and that's really fun for me to just do one at a time. This one on the left is it's in rehearsals now, 6 Degrees of Separation. I got to work with Alex Katz to do these pieces, which is a blast. And although these are existing paintings, he didn't have time to do custom paintings, but I got to work with him and pick them out. This is Sweat, which opened Sunday night, which is an amazing play. Could win the Pulitzer and will probably win Best Play. So if you love a play, go see Sweat. And this is Sweeney Todd, which is downtown now in a real meat pie shop, and it's an incredible production. And this was a blast. This is sort of not a real, it's based in a real pie shop in England. So this is like assembled out of like 19 different fronts of stores to make a thing that looks real but isn't actually. And we shot all these pieces separately and put it together, and that was a blast.
So before we take questions from the audience, you're now basically just a designer again.
So
How do you feel?
So that's why I sold it. I had gotten to a place where it was such a business, and that sounds like it's some terrible thing. It was actually, I really love the fact that as a graphic designer, I was expected to be a business person and a successful one, and to help these other people be successes. And I had gotten good at that, but I really missed the creative piece of it, and it was a lot of pressure. I took all these shows very personally, and a lot of them don't succeed. And when they don't succeed, you literally are the person to say to somebody, this is the review here. They call your mother a horror. Literally, I've been that person often. It was my job to bring the reviews and with the press people. I love the team of people, but I was pretty fried. I had done it for 20 years, and I never imagined selling it, but then someone offered to buy it, and it was a good idea, combining it. They combined it with a shop in London that does what we do, and so that's kind of nice. There was a bit to learn back and forth with the different ways people did it. So now I'm just a designer, an art director, and it's such a pleasure to just return to that. I can never keep up with how good everyone now is digitally, but I can imagine it and say to somebody, what if we did this? And it really is a joy to still have like the big idea and just be like, oh, literally the big idea in this one was that we couldn't show the Pepsi sign, but we could reflect the red and the blue, and that would make it contemporary. And that was so much fun to just say, oh, I know, we'll get a sign, it'll be like Pepsi. Well, that was a blast. So it's still, I love being back to being a designer. So I'm working on this stuff. There's a new performing arts center being built at the World Trade Center called the Perlman. Ronald Perlman gave them $100 million, and it's going to be sort of like a new Lincoln Center. It's
That's
be
the
on
3
plaza.
theaters?
It's the 3 theaters, and so I'm doing the branding on that. Actually, I can't show it because I presented it last week, and they haven't picked what they like, but that was a blast. I'm working on Mean Girls for Tina Fey. I've never wanted anyone to like me more than Tina Fey. You want her to like you so badly, and she actually is, so far, exactly who you hope her to be. And that's usually it's the opposite. If somebody seems like they're going to be a jerk, they're often very nice. And if someone seems like they're going to be wonderful, they're often a jerk. And she is funny and playful and unaffected. And you just can't believe your good luck to be in the room with her. And I'll put this up. Oh, I forgot to put this up. I forgot I have one last slide. So Jennifer Kynan, who's sitting over there, asked me to do one of a whole series of buttons for Hillary, and I loved it. It was so fun, wildly intimidating. Louise did one. None of us knew what other people were doing. So everything you would do, you would think, oh God, someone else is doing this. This is terrible. But the buttons are pretty amazing. Mine is the Hillary prepared. So it was based on the fact that Hillary was for PrEP, which is basically a cure for AIDS, and no one talks about it enough. And I couldn't believe that it was a plank in her campaign. And of course, sadly, she did not get a chance to talk about it more. But maybe somebody else will. And actually, there was a whole show on it on NPR this week on the A1, which is the show that replaced Diane. What's her last name? Reeves? Yeah. So, and this is from the book, which is just everybody who worked at SpotCo, because it's a lot of great creative people. Like I said, there's 120 people who work there. We have, so there. What I did was basically it's an art department that I built an ad agency around, and over time, it became an ad agency. But in the beginning, it was a design studio with arms that looked like ad agency arms. You know, like we could do the thing, so we could buy media, and we knew how to buy media, and we had writers, and we had, we have production artists, and we have video editors, and we have, digital people, and we have all these account people, and we now have HR.
And you had a private entrance when you were on 7th Avenue.
We did. Well, it was not a secret. It was just, we were all around right in here, but we used to be at 38th and 7th. And it was an old deco building on the second floor, and it was a blast. Now we're at 40th and 41st, between 6th and 7th. We always have to be near Times Square. These shows don't have an office. It's like, take 10 really rich people who are each icons in their own. Then they all decide to invest in a show. They're all used to running their own business some way. And then they all decide we're gonna, like you and me and 20 other like filthy rich crazy people all get their own way every time. And then they all come together to work on this one thing, and there's no office. So they meet in our office. And then I'm supposed to control them, literally, and kind of keep them in line. And sometimes they were just amazing. You would literally get people, Harvey Weinstein and Oprah Winfrey and Jeffrey Katzenberg, and you get these amazing people. And sometimes this one guy kept saying to me, that is not how we did it. That is not how we did it. And finally I said, I'm sorry, sir. I don't know you. What is the we? Where did you do it? And at least then I can understand what you're comparing this to. And his name was like Harvey Langtonschlitz or something. And he was the inventor of the members only jacket. And that was his, and he made a ton of money. And that was his way, that was his idea of marketing. And it had worked for him, so he didn't understand why we weren't doing any of those things. And so that happens. People like what we're doing, and they always feel like you're doing it the usual Broadway way, and that means you're phoning it in. And it takes quite a while to explain to people that there is actually a reason that we've done it the other way and it didn't work. But that's why I stopped, because that part of it is kind of soul killing. But if you can, the beauty of it is two ways. One, if you had a great design, the people you had to convince were right in front of you, which is not often the case, right? That it goes up to some floor you can't go on and you hear that someone killed something. But then, but they're right in front of you, and if you can't convince them, then, then it's it's still not running. So, it was both a joy and non-functional in the way that a really great organization that has a lead creative gets a path going, and there's some captain of the ship who loves what its creative department's doing. That never happened. You basically started over every time. Except for a thing like Chicago, where you built up a head of steam and people thought you knew what you were doing and they let you do it.
So one final question from me. Everybody used to say, almost in cliche, our parents didn't know what we did as designers. Does Mrs. Hodges know what Drew has done now?
I'm sure I don't know everything, but I'm very proud to know the things I know.
She's
Thank
a
you.
politician. She's got it. See where I get it?
Let anybody here in the audience like to ask a question or two or three?
I know it's hot.
We can't see hands in any case.
Darling. Okay, thanks.
Do you now pitch against SpotCo, or is that?
Good question. No, it's something I said I wouldn't do. So I will work for any producer, not just SpotCo, although what's happened is exactly what I thought would happen, which is the SpotCo are the people, those producers are the people who know. So no one else has asked me, although I would, but what I won't do is do a pitch. Also, part of that is because I hate pitches, and I don't really be a part of them anyways. So that's an easy one to say. So no, I don't pitch against SpotCo. I have helped SpotCo with a pitch or two, because they asked me, and it was a fun project. Mean Girls is that. They said, will you help on Mean Girls? And I said, do I get to meet Tina Fey? And they said Tina Fey and Lorne Michaels in Lorne Michaels' office. And I said, I will do it. And that's true. I mean, that happened just a month ago, maybe. So I don't pitch against them, and I don't really take a part in any pitches. It's just a big world, and I don't need to, so I just do them one at a time.
Is the downtown theater through SpotCo or through you?
Downtown theater, both actually. I asked. This is kind of a funny story. So the artistic director knows me well and asked me if I would look at a list. I haven't told this story before. We'll see where it goes, because it's true. She said she had a list of 10 design firms, and would I help her whittle it down? So she put it in front of me. I didn't know like 3 of them, but I knew everybody else, and I knew her well. And I certainly didn't say, not them, not them, but I said, I think you might really enjoy this group, that group, that group. And they were all the biggies, you know, the big corporate design firms. And then, because it's federal money, it's the whole thing. And then I said to her a day after, can I be on that list? And she said, no. And I was like, what do you mean? Why no? Okay. And she said, you're like a person, you don't even have like a website. Like it's Ronald Perlman, it's $100 million. We need an office and a thing and a background. I was like, okay. And then I went, and that made perfect sense to me. And she was very straight up, and I liked that. And I went back, and then I actually went to SpotCo and said, I think if I was the creative director and you were the agency, they would see us. And they said, sure, because they'd like to be the ongoing ad agency. And so I went back, and we got put on the list of 10, and then it got cut to 5, and then 3, and then 2, and then we won it. And then I just showed the work 2 days ago. It was an amazing company. I mean, just the best. I'm sure I'm not supposed to, but you know who they are, just the best of the best people were on the list. So I was incredibly honored just to be in the room. And we couldn't even begin to compete with like, here's how, we redid Visa. I mean, we just had to go in with what we know about theater, with, because we hadn't done that kind of corporate rebranding. Yes.
Especially with so many musicals already coming from being movies, how do you see like the LA branding agencies changing the scene going forward?
Here's the thing. There's one agency which is called BLT on the West Coast, and they're an amazing agency actually, and they do beautiful work. And I don't even know how they do it, because as crazy as I could tell you so many crazy Broadway stories, it's like 1/10 of the movie thing, which is like just like nuclear war. It's so crazy. There's not enough money for them, is the bottom line. That even that one agency doesn't seem interested in opening a shop here, because what they want is the producer of the Broadway show's movie accounts, because there's a lot of money there. And there's a reason why a lot of people don't open up Broadway shops, because it's really actually not a very easy way. It's like not like a way to make a killing. It's like a day in, day out slog. And so that's also why lots of regular ad agencies don't do the Broadway work. And every 5 years, someone takes their account and goes to Saatchi or does, because they have already, usually because they've already been there, or because they think that the Broadway people must not be good enough, and really this should be brought to the pros. And what happens is, you can tell how I feel about that, but what happens is the pros learn really quickly that this is a drag, and it's hard, and it takes so many man hours that they just, and I'm sure they could do beautiful work, obviously, but they kind of just go like, yeah, that was fun, but that's not the best business model for me. So that's why it actually stays a fairly small world. It's a hard arena to survive in. And when I started, there were 5 agencies, and soon after that there were 2. 3 of them went out within like a year and a half, because they were all stiffed by somebody who, just one ad in the New York Times is $100,000. So when when we were a 5-person design studio, I mean, the next thing that happened was we started buying $100,000 ads, and if you don't get paid back, because the New York Times gets paid, the money comes in up front. So if you don't get the money back, you're done. I mean, like, you're done for years, you're done. And I've watched it happen. So you have to really kind of stay on top of numbers things. And in the world of Broadway, it can get a little fluid as to who has their funding and who doesn't, whereas a movie studio presumably has the capital, and so at least if you're working for, you got a PO from Warner Brothers, you're gonna get paid. So I don't see them moving into it. But I have to say, I admire the work, and in some ways, I felt guilty when I started that I felt like all I was really doing was bringing the entertainment work that I had done for other arenas and bringing it to Broadway. So I didn't think I was really doing anything that was that new, but it was new in that context. So I do sometimes think that's probably true of the movie thing too, that they know things that we don't know that they could bring to bear. But honestly, so much of that stuff now doesn't seem to be so much about creativity as it is about data and muscle and, you know, other stuff, which is valid tools, but they're not what I'm interested in. You know, I was very lucky that SpotCo got to play as a big ad agency in this world, but I was in it because I loved the design. And so that was the dichotomy that was kind of interesting, was to be a business and have 120 people, but to have the heart of a 5-person design studio and see if you could keep that alive was kind of the game, you know, and somehow this work got a very broad distribution. So in some ways it's very, very commercial work, but I like to think that it kept the integrity as to work that's less commercial. That was certainly, that was what I was in it for, and that's what I became fascinated about. And then by the end, none of those clients who aren't here, none of them sort of think of me as a designer. I don't think they even know I'm a designer. They think of me some other way, like and that's okay. I still was always a designer and making sure that the things were beautiful. So that was fun.
Do you have any desire to go into the theater where you're working in sets?
That's funny. I'd love to be a set designer, but then I'd have to like go back to school and go to Yale, and I just don't think I got the energy. But I'm really good friends with a bunch.
You didn't have to go to school to become an advertising.
Well, but I went to school to become a designer. I'm very good friends with several of the set designers, and in fact, sometimes, you know, it's an amazing thing when some piece of your design ends up on the stage or vice versa, and we will sometimes share reference when it's starting and no one's sure what it is. David Rockwell or Scott Pask or any number of them will actually, some of them are really very generous because they've come to trust me and me them. So I love that, and actually, the producer of Brent and Hamilton has said to me, why don't you produce a Broadway show? And oddly, I actually know a lot more about theater than I ever thought I would. So I probably could. There's somebody back here who worked for us who's now producing. That's not unusual, that people who love the theater learn it. I don't know. I'm not sure it's my skill.
Although it sounds like you did do a lot of producing work.
You have a role. Without a doubt, you have a role, and that's amazing. But I don't know that I think I have that gift. I mean, I know I've seen some pretty smart people humbled pretty deeply. You know, you think you know it's gonna fly, and then, like, the best thing I could tell anybody who's gonna invest in theater is to diversify. So if you had $100,000 that your uncle left you, then you can't actually put $25,000 in a show, really, but if you could, then you'd have to pick 4 and put 25 in each of them, and then 2 will fail miserably and you lose all 25. 1 you might break even, and 1 you might make $8,000. But then if you do it for 3 years going, or 5, somewhere in the middle, one of them will kind of go, and it will be, I got, as a thank you to me, the producer of Hamilton let me put an investment in Hamilton, so I'm actually a producer of Hamilton. And I think it may just about make me smile for a very long time. And it's a tiny amount of money, but it's just joyful, you know, to sort of get this check for doing nothing.
But wait, can you get me tickets?
Yeah, no, can't, not at all. I actually really can't get them anymore.
Yeah, you said you walked out of.
I can't.
I
Yeah,
know,
you
but
walked-
now he's
yeah,
a
you were on
producer.
the blacklist. No, I didn't remember that, and you know, we've all done many a thing in a Broadway house. So, but people do. It's funny. Kevin Bernard, who can't be here tonight, but he was a designer working for a long time. He worked with me on Sweat, and we really had fun getting to know each other. But he asked me today if he could get tickets to the opening of Sweat on Sunday, and I got them for him. And he's going. And now I realize I have to write him and say, you know, you have to act. You now have these tickets. You cannot not show up for opening night. There can't be an empty seat. You can't Like, you can't send your aunt and then she leaves at intermission. Like, it cannot happen. Like, my name will be Mud. You can't take an opening night seat, but you were there on a regular night. You can, anybody
I
wants
still
that.
apologize.
Not at all.
One last question?
Oh, it's so hot.
Well, there are none, but I had a great night. You are a great opening act and final act.
I was like, who's next? Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for coming out. That was fun. Really fun.
Thank you.